Fountainhead Forum 12, I have James Jenneman, who is a liberty activist. He's done the Blackbird podcast and the Urban Agorist podcast. He currently serves on the Bylaws Committee, the Platform Committee, and the Judicial Committee of the Libertarian Party in Minnesota. How are you doing, James?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks, Chris, for having me on. Broadcasting live from the frigid North Minnesota. So you're down in Texas, right?
Yes, yeah, and I think you said you had some time in Texas too. I'm in Austin.
Yeah. I grew up in Dallas, so I kind of miss it, to be honest. When the winter starts, I don't know. Winter starts up here like in the very beginning of November, which is I'm just not used to it. I guess I've been up here for a dozen years. I think this will actually be 13 years coming up in February.
We're on the same time zone. Of course, Minnesotans actually do kind of embrace the winter a little bit. They do enjoy their winter sports.
Yeah. Some of them do. A lot of people just love it, and I don't understand that. I think most people hate it when it's cold, and like really embrace the summer and stuff. But yeah, they make the most of it, either cross country skiing or ice fishing or whatever. I know a lot of people who ice fish. I've never done it before.
I know the University of Minnesota cheerleaders will even do stunts on ice at hockey games. Which you certainly wouldn't see in the South. That they hardly know that hockey exists in Texas. At least a lot of people do. It's kind of interesting. But anyway, how'd you get started with libertarianism? In the movement or the party. How'd you end up here?
Yeah, so it all kind of started really when I was in high school. I took a government class my senior year, and I was really interested in like the kind of inner workings of government, just kind of how it worked. My government teacher, who was a kind of Massachusetts lefty, even told us about the Fed, which I had never heard of the Federal Reserve before then. But he talked about how the president or the chairman of the Federal Reserve was really the most powerful person in the world. And so that kind of piqued my interest in that. And I don't know, I wasn't really into ideology so much, but I for whatever reason, I think I probably just like Googled political spectrum or something like that. And I came across a couple of quizzes. One of which was just like it plotted you with politicians based on your answers on the quiz. And back then, the Overton window, when the mass media kind of controlled information completely, and the internet was just still very new. The Overton window was so narrow that like the farthest left person was maybe like Dennis Kucinich or something like that. Hillary Clinton was considered on the far left. And then the far right was someone like Newt Gingrich. And I think probably like Hillary and Newt would kind of be considered centrist at this point. Maybe not Newt, given that he's kind of a MAGA guy. And so they would paint him as far right. But I consider him mainstream. I mean, he was back then. So anyway, I was plotted right between Hillary and Bill Clinton, which would have been somewhere between the center left and the far left on that quiz. And then I took another quiz. It was the world's smallest political quiz, which is put out by a libertarian organization. So, it's kind of meant to identify libertarians. It's kind of skewed that way. But I did land in the upper quadrant of that in the libertarian area. And I think that I doubt it was the first time I ever heard the word libertarian, but it was the first time I was ever plotted as one. Yeah. So that's kind of how I first heard about it. I always voted for third-party candidates, throughout the 2000s and beyond. It wasn't always for libertarians. I voted for Green Party candidates a lot too. I was very much on the anti-war left. So I graduated from high school in 2001, like right before 9/11.
Yes.
And so I was like prime age. If they were to reinstate the draft, like I would have been drafted. And that kind of spooked me, I guess. But also just, I found these like kind of lefty websites. I watched a lot of Michael Moore documentaries and stuff back then. And so it gave me this real deep skepticism of the U.S. intelligence community, the U.S. military, Colin Powell himself, given his little presentation to the UN, even though he didn't believe a word he was saying, like all of that stuff that, we all know now. I knew back then, which, that's not like a feather in my cap or whatever. I happened to stumble upon the right websites. One of which was this site called Working for Change that Matt Welch from Reason wrote for back then. I think he followed the geez, what's that Green Party candidate? He's the one. He's like the reason we have seatbelts in cars.
Ralph Nader.
Yeah, Ralph Nader. He followed his campaign in 2000.
Yeah, Ralph, who got more votes than Harry Brown in 2000.
Yeah. And like he's the reason Florida was so close, according to the Democrats.
Well, it was close anyway. And you were in Texas at the time, so you weren't in Minnesota during the tenure of Jesse the Body Ventura.
I actually I moved here briefly right out of high school. I was going to go to a culinary arts school and become a chef, and I had family up here, and I kind of wanted to get away from my family and just kind of experience independence. So I moved up here and was going to go to the Art Institute of Minnesota, which is now defunct. I think all the art institutes are defunct now. But working in restaurants just wasn't for me. But anyway, so I was here, and I remember one of the biggest events of like the short time that I was here was a government shutdown. And I didn't know what that meant either. And I, still to this day, like, what does a government shutdown really mean? It's not like the kids don't go to school. It's not like the cops aren't still roaming the streets, etc. But yeah, that was a thing. And I think Jesse Ventura was blamed for it or something like that. I could have my facts mismatched, but I kind of remember that from the 01, 02 era.
Yeah. That's interesting. I was of prime military age when the first Gulf War happened, and that definitely made me more anti-war at the time. And back then you could still depend on some of the old hippies or the descendants of the hippies to be anti-war. I mean, I remember the first Gulf War. Rolling Stone magazine was one of the better anti-war voices at the time. And
oh, really?
Yeah, they definitely were. They were still, which I, looking back, it doesn't seem like it was much, but it was very significant, because if there's no Gulf War at the time, there's probably no World Trade Center, and that really was the first time after the fall of the Berlin Wall that America got into a war effectively by choice that wasn't really other than just to line the pockets of the defense contractors, in my opinion. At least during the Cold War, you had might have had an intellectual justification for it, but it's not that way now. And of course, you were in Texas, which has always been a very gung-ho state. Maybe not as gung-ho as it used to be, but certainly rally around the flag and that kind of thing, rally around the troops. So it was all just blogs and websites. I mean, interesting.
For the most part. I got real into the Daily Kos, which you may have heard of. I think that's still kind of a bigger left-wing blog / community. I haven't been there in a while. I don't even know if it's still a blog. Blogs are kind of passe at this point. But yeah, and so following my left-wing stint, I was a huge Howard Dean supporter. I don't know if you remember him, but he was sort of the voice of the anti-war left, even though he's, plumb line moderate, other than that. So I was real big on Howard Dean. I was very disappointed that, the Scream ended his campaign because it seemed so petty to me.
There was a group. I remember a group on Yahoo, Libertarians for Dean. There were quite a few libertarians who saw Dean as somewhat of an outsider, and also he was rare because he was blue but had a pretty good record on guns. Because Vermont still has pretty good gun laws, and really also coming from that dying breed of what I would call the country Democrats, which it's almost as if Joe Manchin's the only one left now. The blue politician who comes from the small town and cares about the common man, the working man, maybe had a lot of backings from labor unions, or people who used to be in the labor unions, but those almost don't exist. Jim Trafficant might have been in that class too. Maybe to a certain extent, Dennis Kucinich.
Maybe this, because I have been wondering about this lately. Like, how did prior to the two parties just being split basically on ideological lines, how did conservative Democrats and progressive Democrats coexist in the same party? Like, what what was their common thread? Was it just the Democratic Party, or like did they have some kind of focus areas that they both cared about, and like other ideological issues just took a back seat to that?
That is a very interesting question, and I often wonder how they did. I don't think the far left, the far left Democrats have definitely gotten a lot crazier now than they used to be. I mean, if you think back even further, somebody like Larry McDonald, who was in Congress from Georgia and was, in there in the 70s, early 80s. And I remember Ron Paul talks about how great he was because he was almost like, Ron Paul, but he called himself a Democrat, but he was also from Georgia. And at the time in the South, that's what you did. That's what you were in the South.
Right.
You were not a Republican. You never went to the other party. I don't really, boy, how did they coexist? That's really a good question. Because looking at it now, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense that they did coexist. I'd
like to ask Brian McClanahan about that. You should try to get, since I'm not doing my show anymore, you should try to get Brian on yours.
I mean, how the whole party evolved the way it did, and really it's changed a lot. If you look at the history of the Red Team, it's not really changed all that much, but they've changed immensely, from the era of Jacksonian political economy and limited government to where they are now. The only thing I can really say about it is that it seems as though they've followed the academics.
Yeah, that makes sense. Have you heard of Legal Man? He's a
Legal Man. No, I've not heard of that.
Okay, so he lives in Texas. I think he lives in Plano, which is a suburb north of Dallas or thereabouts. So he hosts a podcast called The Quash, and one of his big things is critiquing like Mark Levin and other constitutional conservatives. He thinks that constitutional conservatism is like a bigger threat than progressivism at this point, because they keep conservatives and others on the right kind of in that box of like, this is our Constitution. It's the greatest freedom document ever written. And, we just have to get back to these principles, when like, there's just kind of no going back to those principles. Like the Constitution is basically dead. And so a huge thing on his show is talking about kind of the state of conservatism and how it's just a huge sham.
Yeah.
Which, he's also very down on voting in general, though. Like he just is completely black-pilled. He doesn't think that there's any sort of reforming. He won't vote for libertarians or anything like that either.
Well, there's I like what Rollo Tomasi says when he says conservatives don't want the red pill, they want a time machine. And I do find it curious that a lot of these self-proclaimed constitutional conservatives completely ignore the fact that the Constitution says absolutely nothing about immigration, but they all hate immigrants. So that's another thing they can't really reconcile. There is nothing in the Constitution that says anything that says you have to build border walls or have this massive police state apparatus to control who goes in and out of the country.
Yeah.
The Constitution does say things about becoming an American citizen and naturalization, but not just about walking across the border and getting a job.
Yeah.
Walking across the border to buy a hamburger or something like that.
Well, and the thing about that is, as far as I know, all of that was left to the states. Like you became an American citizen by becoming a state citizen.
I don't really, I haven't read much up on that, but definitely it was very easy to come into America, and it was and for better or for worse, it's
and in a free or free-ish market scenario, that makes absolute sense. I think the more the state enters into the day-to-day lives of the individual, the less the individual benefits from more and more and more people entering his life as well.
Well, I've learned
that's a real rudimentary thought, what I just said. So
I've come to the realization that if you have a healthy culture and a healthy country, you're going to attract the great immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
And if your culture's completely shot like our and rotting like our culture is, you're going to attract the wrong kind of immigrants. But if the wrong kind of immigrants are coming, your culture's shot anyway.
Yeah. And so many of the immigrants that come to America are here because they're refugees from our global wars on drugs and terror and
Exactly.
everything else.
If we ended the war on drugs, how would that impact Mexico? I think it would. Would really be interesting.
Yeah.
There's still. I realize though too, though there's still very much a romantic vision of America that we don't really understand. That foreigners have. Once you interact with foreigners and interact with some of the foreign libertarians, you realize there still is this idealistic vision of America. Yeah. I don't think they realize that America is basically a rotting corpse right now.
Yeah. An empire in a state of decay, as Curtis Yarvin says it.
What was that? What was that again that Yarvin said?
He calls it rather than an empire in the state of decline, he calls it an empire in the state of decay.
Yeah, and COVID made me realize that empires don't die with a bang; they die with a whimper. And COVID was the whimper.
Yeah.
Although I often feel like 9/11 really was the beginning of the end, because there was still, I think we probably could have salvaged the country through the system back then, but I don't know if we can now.
No, I don't think so either. Yeah. The blatant cronyism with the defense industry, especially that came after 9/11, it really did turn us from an ostensible republic into the just firmly oligarchic system of governance that we have now.
And we had, when we did actually have budget surpluses during Clinton's presidency, which we've never had any budget surpluses since then.
I think another thing that that sort of the Bush administration specifically is responsible for is wokeness, which you think of that as like a left-wing phenomenon, but who was it when today's woke 20-year-olds, who was it that was saying, if you see something, say something? I need an adult in every aspect of my life. That's where that comes from. It's that culture of fear that Donald Rumsfeld created.
Yeah.
With the color codings and the posters to call the cops on your neighbors if it feels like they might be up to something suspicious, maybe, like all of that stuff, all of that snitch culture, and watch each other, try to catch each other doing stuff. All of that turned into the sort of, you remember safe spaces? That was a real big thing a few years ago. That's kind of where that came from. And it's because the parents of those kids were really, really taken in by the Bush administration's messaging back then that made these kids feel like they needed to be under constant supervision. And now that they're graduating and becoming actual powerful people, you're like seeing it in HR departments and stuff like that. Where they've kind of taken over, and especially obviously the school system.
Yeah, well, Mark Pellegrino, who's an objectivist, made a good observation. He says the right starts something, they don't do it very well, and then later the left picks it up, and then they do it a lot better. And cancel culture, I can go back and think about the right wing and cancel culture, wanting to cancel Ozzy Osbourne, wanting to cancel, a sitcom like Married with Children. Even in the early days, wanting to cancel Bart Simpson.
But you also have to remember that Tipper Gore, I mean, that was bipartisan. Tipper Gore was the one who really, really pushed for that censorship, especially in the music industry. Yeah, music industry.
Yeah, it was all, and really also, going back to, after the World Trade Center, the Dixie Chicks. The Dixie Chicks survived, but there was a lot of that going on, definitely. Although there was also a gradual devolution of the whole thing about safe spaces. I'm realizing now that there has been a gradual extension of childhood, in a case where the society has become more infantilized. And I would tell if I had kids nowadays, I would, and they wanted to watch sitcoms, I would say, watch a sitcom, say from the 50s or the 60s, like Leave It to Beaver, because there was this culture of, well, my grandfather walked 2 miles to school as a first grader each way. Nowadays, that would be considered, you can't allow a child to do that. That's abuse.
Yeah.
Just recently, this woman was arrested for letting her 8-year-old walk. She was just, I guess the 8-year-old was fighting with the siblings or something. And what do you do if you're a parent? And just say, okay, you can get out of the car and walk home. And he knew the way home. And then police picked up 8 years old. Now, I can remember as an 8-year-old walking to, the local swimming pool, going to swim there. I can remember a lot. I can remember walking lots of places when I was 8.
Yeah, we used to ride bikes to 7-Eleven, and there's a donut store in the same shopping center. We'd go down there almost every day on a really busy street too. Like, it wasn't like we were just kind of walking around the neighborhood.
So you have these people who haven't went out and and they've taken things away, and just all in the name of safety, and it's just become ridiculous. A lot of swimming pools don't have the high dive anymore. The diving board that's 10 feet up over the water.
I haven't seen a high dive since I was a little kid. Yeah,
and you dive off into the water, and the water is about maybe 12 feet deep. And I think the general rule is that how high the board is, that's how deep the water is. But that seems to be usually how it works. But, they usually make the diving wells pretty deep if they can. But I think they usually make them as deep as the boards are. But that way, it's just. But no, can't do that now. It's too dangerous. All this stuff is too dangerous. And it's really, I don't see that in other places. And it's really a very humongous issue, I think, in the West. And it's not healthy. It probably has saved the lives of some kids, but I don't see. But I think the trade-off has been pretty negative.
It's made insurance companies a fortune as well.
Oh yeah.
And that actually, when I was a kid, or a teenager, 15, 16 or whatever, that's when they started taking out high dives. Like, I remember them when I was little, and I asked the manager of the pool that we used to hang out at, like, why they didn't have a high dive, and he said that we can't afford the insurance. Like, it was so exorbitant that they just couldn't even install them anymore.
Yeah, insurance is also insurance has definitely become a real. It's become really crazy. Sometimes sometimes too, I know, I remember one time I was driving by this parking lot where AT&T, where there was AT&T offices, and they had a bunch of company vehicles, that all said AT&T on them. And I remember seeing every single AT&T vehicle was in the parking space with the head out. And I'm thinking, is that some stupid insurance rule that says they have to back into parking spaces?
I wonder if it is.
And I said, I bet it is, which is one of the, and personally, it's one of the dumbest things in the world. Now I will, whenever I can, I will pull through a parking space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I can pull out, going forward. But backing into a parking space is ridiculous. I mean, as I said, you're trying to hit a target going backward, whereas when you go out, you don't have to hit the. But anyway,
I guess I've noticed that too. I don't know if it's an insurance thing or convenience thing or what. I'm not very good at driving backwards anyway, so I don't really back into spots.
Yeah, and it's probably just somebody in some room somewhere decided, oh, this is what we're going to declare safe, so we require that.
That's funny.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how that happened. It's pretty ridiculous, though. Yeah, it's
So I guess kind of next up in my libertarian journey, after being a Howard Dean guy and him crashing and burning, I think I fell in with like Dennis Kucinich. I think he was still in the race or something like that. It doesn't matter. Fast forward, after that election or somewhere thereabouts, I got I kind of rediscovered like my Catholic faith. And since Pope John Paul II and later Pope Benedict were anti-war, I thought, yeah, this is great. I'm still kind of sticking to my values, because the anti-war thing was really my biggest value. I also had the kind of weird thing of being pro-life, which back then it wasn't completely unheard of for a Democrat or a lefty to be pro-life. In fact, I think the Democratic Party even had like a pro-life caucus. But it was becoming that way. All the Catholic Democratic politicians were, they personally opposed, but not legislatively or whatever it was. And so anyway, that was a big thing in my sort of Catholic faith, I guess. And I never dropped it. I'm still pro-life. So I started reading Catholic blogs, and there's this one guy named Mark Shea. He's an author, kind of an armchair theologian, and a Chestertonian. So anyway, he's just a very good writer, a very good communicator. He's funny, and his degree is in English, so he would do a lot of book reviews, and he reviewed this one book by this Catholic writer, a historian by the name of Tom Woods. The name of the book was "How the Catholic Church Built Western Civilization," and I was like, "Oh, that's cool. That sounds like a fun Catholic book by a historian." And little did I know, Tom Woods would become like the rock star of the libertarian movement. Around that same time, Mark Shea, the blogger, he needed a presidential candidate. I think this must have been in 08. He needed a presidential candidate who was anti-war and also pro-life. And of course, the only one who met those criteria was Ron Paul. And so I discovered Ron Paul and Tom Woods through this Catholic blogger who's not libertarian at all. He thinks that healthcare is a right. He is just super, super, super anti-Trump, which that's not necessarily a libertarian thing, but like he's kind of a hysterical lefty in a lot of things, but because of the Catholic connection with Tom Woods and the pro-life / anti-war with Ron Paul, that's where I found these guys. It turned out that, like, being a devout Catholic just really isn't in my personality style. First, considering that I'm gay, and that doesn't really jive well with being in communion with the church. But also, second, like, it just I kind of lost interest, I guess. But I didn't lose interest in Ron Paul and Tom Woods. And so, for the 08 and then 2012 election cycles, I was, firmly in the Ron Paul camp, watched all the YouTube videos and everything, just like every other Ron Paul kid back then. And that's how I kind of discovered Murray Rothbard. And I heard Lou Rockwell on a Tom Woods interview. And Lou Rockwell said, he said, I'm no fan of the Constitution. And I thought, well, that's crazy. Who's not a fan of the Constitution? Because, like, Ron Paul always would talk about the Constitution. So I just kind of figured that that's what libertarianism was. But after Lou Rockwell said he wasn't a fan of the Constitution, I had to learn more. So I started reading LouRockwell.com. I read For a New Liberty by Murray Rothbard. And that kind of solidified me as sort of the ANCAP. Although I don't know if today, like, ANCAP is really a accurate descriptor of me. I guess philosophically I'm still anarcho-capitalist, but, like, I'm a little bit more pragmatic at this point. Kind of post-COVID, philosophy has been a little bit less important to me, I guess.
Yes, that's interesting. Yeah, I don't know if I've known any gay Catholics, but it does seem like there's. I often call myself a sex-positive traditionalist. I've accepted that. I just say the 10% will always be with us.
Yeah,
and I think that's pretty much the truth. And
yeah.
Whether this is determined biologically or something else, I don't know. I think we may find out, but I think we just if we have a society where people can be themselves, but I also think I also think the healthiest societies do generally have people getting married, having kids, and staying married. But we're always going to have that minority that doesn't do that. But we've now upset the apple cart so much, though, that it's hard for, I think, people who would probably like to get married don't get married. I assume you probably were a fan of Raimondo too, then.
I wasn't during his life. I had never heard of him. Like, I had heard of him, but I never really read him. Yeah. But yeah, I am. I would say I am a huge fan of his now.
Yeah, he was an anti-war and certainly a gay Buchanan supporter.
Yeah. I think he's pretty great. I hate to have to say this, but I don't agree with him on everything. But yeah, I mean, I think he's awesome. I love reading his stuff. He's funny and mean and just kind of a little sassy bitch, but like a right-wing sassy bitch, which I love.
Yeah, that's there can definitely be that element. I mean, it's I've and Lou Rockwell has always been that website has always been very Catholic. He talks about Latin masses and Tom Woods, and I'm certainly intrigued by the thing about Catholics building Western civilization, because there is a lot of truth to it. Because Catholicism is certainly more Aristotelian than the other branches of Christianity, and I think that's I think you have to be somewhat Aristotelian to be a libertarian.
Yeah, especially post Thomas Aquinas, which it's not a coincidence that Ayn Rand considered Aquinas and Aristotle the only other two people you should ever read, other than herself, of course.
Yeah, Ayn Rand. I don't know if you're familiar with a really great gay man in the objectives movement named Chris Matthew Skabara. He wrote that book, Ayn Rand, the Russian Radical.
I don't think so. I'm not a huge Randian, so I haven't read a whole lot in there. I haven't even read the postmodernism book that was written by that Randian guy whose name I can't remember.
Hicks.
Yeah, Hicks. Thank you.
Stephen Hicks. Yeah, he's a good guy. Yeah. He's pretty. Yeah, I think his critiques of postmodernism are probably more solid than Jordan Peterson's, although Jordan Peterson is certainly more well known. Mm-hmm. But I've known Hicks since the 90s.
Oh, cool. Yeah, my understanding of Hicks, and this is based on postmodernist critiques of Hicks, is that he is very selective in his criticisms of like Foucault and Derrida. I have not read the postmodernists. I was. And I am a friend of Thad Russell, and so I like all of my exposure to postmodernism is kind of been through him. And my understanding of his exposition of postmodernism is that it's not quite correct, I guess. He debated. Who did he debate? Oh shit! He debated somebody on the Tom Woods show.
Well, Thaddeus and Hicks got into a debate once too. I mean,
yeah. Michael Rechtenwald. He and Michael Rechtenwald debated on the Tom Woods show. And Rechtenwald was like, after this debate, I don't think you're a postmodernist. I think you might be, but you sound like a classical liberal modernist to me, who just has different ways of seeing the world than I do. Which
some thinkers are great because of the answers they give, and some thinkers are great because of the questions they ask. And Thaddeus and Jordan Peterson, I think, are more great because of the questions that they ask. But both are really very important as far as thinkers go. I know. I went to Renegade University last year when Thaddeus, and that was actually in Lockhart, which is only about 20 miles outside of Austin, so that was easy. And you went to it recently because it was up near Illinois, of course.
Well, I went to the Lockhart one too. I wonder if we met and just don't.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you did go to the Lockhart one. Yeah, that's right. You told me that. Yeah,
I actually was working for. I actually was working for Renegade University back then. Thad has since severed ties with RU and is doing his own thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but I was actually kind of at work during that thing, so I wasn't able to mingle quite as much.
What's he? I thought Renegade University was his baby. Why did he sever ties?
No, he was. RU is a partnership, or was a partnership between him and two other guys, and he left them. I don't know if I don't know the full story behind it. I haven't really asked for more information, but the three of them severed ties. RU is still working. I think they have a course with Scott Horton coming out actually pretty soon.
He definitely does some interesting stuff and has some interesting things. I really that was a good card of people he had too. It really wasn't quite as good at the up in the one near Chicago. Scott was here. I'd never heard of that Jack. That's always the measure of a good conference, when you have somebody that I've never heard of, and then I walk out thinking, "Hey, this guy's really cool." Yeah. And that was the case with Jack the Perfume Nationalist, the way he analyzed culture and stuff like that, and it really is significant. Some of those other people there,
Yeah, I love Jack. I had Jack on my show twice. He's actually down there in Austin. You might have a good conversation with him. But yeah, his cultural critique and sense of humor and just like fearlessness to say the most outrageous things. Sometimes he says bullshit stuff just to be provocative, but
Yeah.
I think he's great.
Yeah, I think there are some people who, and every once in a while, if you're provocative, it works. But if you're provocative all the time, people just stop listening, and that's where you have to find that balance. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm scared that that's going to happen to Michael Malice before long. As long as we're like talking about people, I like his trolling is funny, but I have a feeling it's going to wear out its welcome eventually, which.
Hard to say, really. I see where it comes from. I think Malice is probably the best liberty voice for liberty out there right now. We don't really need, and we definitely need more people out there who are just telling jokes and stuff. And every once in a while, and after a while, you just realize that's just Malice being Malice. And you do have to. And another thing too is some of these people, they get bored doing things and they want to go do something else. So that's, the fact that you're able to make a living in the movement is certainly good enough. And Malice has some really good interviews with people. I like Malice a lot.
He's another one of those. I
give him credit for having a good name. That's not his real name, but he came up with that as a pseudonym. And I just think Michael Malice, what a great name.
I know, it's awesome. He's another one who asks great questions. His interview show is phenomenal. I never miss an episode. Even if the guest is someone I've never heard of or who I just figure I won't like, based on their career choices or whatever, I always end up enjoying it. So his is a show I never miss, along with Tom Woods and Dave Smith, I think.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Malice is. I won't say where it is, but sometimes I've occasionally just seen him in person somewhere.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because he's in Austin now, and
Malice
is in Austin. Joe Rogan is in Austin, and of course Angela McArdle's in Austin now too. And Elon, but I don't care that much about Elon.
Yeah,
and of course Michael Dell's always been here, but but yeah.
Oh yeah, I forgot about Michael Dell. Hey, so tell me about the title of your show, Fountainhead Forum. Are you a Randian?
I'm somewhat Randian. I wanted to come up with a good name, and that seemed like a good one. So
I like it.
I don't know, and I don't just want to call it the Chris Baker Show or something like that.
Sure.
But call it something good. And I don't really want to do solos. I think people get a little bored when they just listen to the same voice all the time when you have interviews.
Yeah, it depends on the voice. Like Clint Russell, his deep dives into the World Economic Forum and that kind of thing. I never listened to his show during his rise, but like it's become another one that I rarely miss. Anyway, he does good rants. The legal man who I mentioned earlier, he's sort of a ranting superstar. I can't even imagine him doing an interview, to be honest.
Yeah, that was an interesting name too. I wonder how long that's going to last. The name Liberty Lockdown. I can understand why he called it that, but it's a Malice calls his show "You're Welcome," which is pretty good. I'm probably one thing is you can get some real. I think with a name like Fountainhead Forum, it makes it easier to get some really good objectivists on here, and the really good objectivists are really good, and the really bad and the bad objectivists are really bad. It's kind of the way Rand was.
I know this is your show, but I'm going to ask you a question to kind of make it. I'm putting my interviewer hat on, I guess.
Yeah.
How would you like describe objectivism to someone who's never heard of it? What's a good elevator pitch for the philosophy?
Well, I'd probably come up with Rand's definition: metaphysics, objective reality, epistemology, reason, ethics, rational self-interest, politics, capitalism.
There you go.
Yeah, that's what Rand said. That's not mine. So they just wanted to summarize it, and it's kind of an interesting movement. But there would not be a modern liberty movement without Ayn Rand.
Totally.
Yeah. Although and I'm glad you acknowledged that, because I think a lot of people, because she seems to have drifted out of the liberty movement now, and which is really, in my view.
I think we've kind of at least right now, we've kind of settled on Rothbard as the kind of lodestar or whatever. But and I think a lot of that is because, and correct me if I'm wrong, I wasn't in the movement back then, but weren't a lot of objectivists in favor of the Iraq War?
You mean the first Iraq War? It's
no, the post 9/11 one.
That really, to me, was the beginning of the decline of the objectivist movement, in my opinion.
Okay.
There was a lot of out there, just go hit them back hard attitude, and there was also, unfortunately, a lot of, in my opinion, selling out during March of 2020.
Oh, really?
I definitely think, and I think this is why the split has really hurt both movements, because I think if libertarians and objectivists were still talking to each other, the objectivists might have said, okay, yeah, we probably should be against this. But libertarians, there's a lot of rationalizing in the libertarian movement, and a lot of people are just kind of saying, just, screaming and shouting slogans without really knowing why.
Yeah.
And I really do wish the Libertarian Party and the libertarian movement was more philosophical than it is. So I think they need each other. And the fact that they're so far apart is really an issue for me. And I'm sad to say too, but I also am afraid that the objectivist movement now is not attracting the new blood anymore. And that's really a problem. I went to a couple events, and at 51 years old, I still feel like I'm kind of the young guy there. And
oh, really?
That is not good. I hope they can get things right, but
yeah, I wonder if they have a campus presence or anything like my grandfather gave me the Fountainhead when I think it was on my 16th birthday or something like that. I've still never read it.
Yeah,
it felt like it was such a thick book back then. Not to say that I had never read a thick book, but I was reading, like John Grisham novels that you can read in a weekend.
Yeah.
So I guess that might be part of it, is that even as an almost 40-year-old, my attention span was completely shot by the time I was old enough to start reading and appreciating Rand.
This is going to be one of the ultimate sacrilegious comments to make. But I wish Rand had rewritten shorter versions of her novels, taking out her extremely verbose descriptions.
Yeah, wouldn't she bake those into monologues or something like that?
The speeches are fine, and I think the speeches are part of the story, part of the philosophy. But when she, has a speech like, James was wearing brown glasses and had a thick beard and was wearing a blue sweater and had white socks and brown shoes. And it's like, I don't really care what clothes he was wearing. That's kind of where I am. Yeah. And maybe there was a significance to that, but she would get, she might dedicate a whole page to just describing what you look like.
Oh boy.
And maybe I'm just lazy, but it's like, I don't need, I mean, I read a novel. I don't really have a picture in my head of what the person looks like.
Okay. I think that's kind of me too, except unless the author compares them to some, I'm thinking of the Da Vinci Code. Dan Brown described the main character, whose name I can't remember, as looking like Harrison Ford. And so that's the picture of him that I had in my head, was just Harrison Ford, like Indiana Jones, which is funny because then Tom Hanks ended up playing him, which completely destroyed my image of the character.
Yeah, Hanks is a great actor, but he definitely does not look like Harrison Ford.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, it's funny, yeah.
What else did we want to talk about? You wanted to mention the LP kind of the state.
Yeah, how you've been involved with the LP and the Reno Reset. So what's your take on all of that right now? I mean, what got you involved with the LP and things like that?
Yeah. Well, after Ron Paul didn't get the GOP nomination in 2012, I was a delegate to the Minnesota State GOP convention. And we sent 27, I think it's 27 delegates to, I think it was Orlando in 2012. And of those 27, 26 were Ron Paul supporters. It would have been unanimous, except that Michelle Bachmann, one of the delegates, gave up his slot so that Michelle Bachmann could go as a delegate.
Oh yeah, and Michelle Bachmann, I can't remember who that is.
She was the congresswoman from Minnesota who was like sort of an arch conservative, and it was rumored that her husband was a gay conversion therapist. He claims that he's never done that, but it's kind of funny because he's also super effeminate. So like you see him talk and you're like, wait, he's the husband of this like super arch conservative Christian congresswoman. Anyway, so after that, I joined the LP. I was a big fan of Gary Johnson. Don't hold it against me.
Yeah, no. Most people who liked Ron. I mean, I remember watching debates, and when people applauded for Gary Johnson or applauded for Ron Paul, 90% of those people applauded for Gary Johnson.
Yeah. So I joined the National Party. I didn't back then. You know how the national and state party dynamic is so confusing for new libertarian members. And I feel like more states should be doing the thing that where there's like the joint membership, which I think California is doing, and maybe a couple of other states. But anyway, so I joined the National Party. If I had known then what I know now, I probably would have only joined the Minnesota Party, and maybe joined the National Party later. But in any case, that's when I joined the party. I was a little bit active. Like I would go to my local affiliate meetings for the state party, not knowing that I needed to be a member. I think I even crashed the convention one year. And so, so then I joined the Minnesota Party in 2016. And the feather in my cap for that year was at this Minnesota convention. I don't know if you remember this, but Gary Johnson was, he was sort of raked over the coals for his gay wedding cake position because that was controversial back then.
Yeah.
And so, I as like, sort of the token gay libertarian in the room, or what I thought was, I had never met another gay libertarian. It turns out we're kind of all over the place, but so I made him answer for that, which I thought was kind of nice, or kind of a good thing for me to do specifically. So I became more active in the party then, and in 2019 or 2020, something like that, I ran for the state board. I was an at-large rep or at-large executive or whatever they call it, for a year, and then I ran for judicial committee last year, and I'm sitting there now.
The Ron Paul, Ron Paul and Gary Johnson. There was, I never, I won't argue with success. I mean, Gary Johnson got us the most vote totals we ever got. He wasn't perfect, but he was certainly good enough, and the fact that he'd had, been a governor gave us some credibility that we wouldn't have got. I think we.
Well, and Bill Weld is a hell of a fundraiser too.
Yeah,
that's another thing.
Well, Weld wasn't perfect either. I have a rule though, is I don't complain about any of these people. The only person by far the worst of any of them was Bob Barr. I mean, he was absolutely horrible. And so almost anybody else is off the table as long as Bob Barr's as somebody I can talk about. Cause that was the worst presidential candidate the LP had possibly ever. It's just,
for me, I do not really care about vote totals at all. Like until we're in a position to actually win, I don't really care if we get 5% or 15% of the vote. Yeah. I'm much more interested in a libertarian candidate who looks good on camera and is able to answer questions articulately and present the libertarian position on things in a palatable manner. Harry Brown was real good at that. Dave Smith is fantastic at that, obviously. Joe Jorgen. So that's why I don't like Bob Barr. Is it Bob or Bill? Which one's the president? Bob.
Bob Barr was 2008 presidential candidate. Bill Weld was 2016 VP candidate.
Mm-hmm. So Bob Barr, Bill Weld, Gary Johnson, those guys are more centrist Republicans, and I do not like centrism. I understand that Gary Johnson has very good free market instincts, But he also is like a passionate advocate for things like the so-called fair tax, which to me, like libertarians should not be campaigning on taxes. They should be campaigning against taxes, even if it is a slightly better tax than what's there.
True. Yeah.
So that's my gripe with that. Jo Jorgensen is a great libertarian, but she's not a great messenger. So that's my criticism of her. I've sat and had long conversations with her. She's, Michael Heiss frequently refers to her as a plumb line libertarian. And, I mean, she's definitely ideologically fantastic. It's just the way that she kind of words things and I don't think she quite understood what we were up against. She was pretty blue pilled and I feel like, that's a flaw.
The only criticism I have, I actually turned out to be a Joe supporter before the convention, but the one criticism I had of Joe was, and I remember her, coming here to Austin to give us, and she spoke for about an hour, and she maybe contributed 5 minutes to what was going on with the Corona hysteria. If you had shown up at that speech from a time machine, it could have just as easily been 1996 as it would have been 2020. I think Joe. It's not hard to figure out why Joe got the nomination. I think she got the nomination because she had run for VP, and she also was probably the most popular candidate that nobody hated.
Yeah, exactly.
There was no faction that was saying never Jo Jorgensen.
Right.
There were certainly never Kokesh, never Hornberger, never Gray, never. There were a lot of people who were saying never this, never that.
Yeah.
But I didn't know anybody who was never Jo Jorgensen.
What about John Mons?
I really liked John Mons after I got to know him. I also, unfortunately, he didn't get much traction. I really liked Mark Whitney too.
But I liked Mons.
I thought Mark Whitney would have been a great candidate, and he seems to have disappeared from the party, which is unfortunate. But I thought I really liked him, the way he spoke and everything. He was.
Is he a little unhinged? I don't remember him well.
I don't know. I don't know.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I'm thinking of Dan Taxationist Theft Berman. No, but John Mons, I thought he was great.
Yeah, John Mons. John Mons
better than Joe. But I bet you Joe's national political campaign experience might have given her the edge over him. Given that she run for VP.
I'm largely coming to the conclusion too that if somebody's going to run for president on our ticket, they should have run for something else before they want to walk in and I mean, unless it's somebody who's really, really famous, but I think it's a good idea if they've at least had the experience of maybe running for governor or running for a Senate seat or running for even a city council or something like that. I'm leaning probably. I'd really like to see Spike run in 2024, and Spike Cohen, and certainly Justin Amash would be okay. I don't know anybody else out there right now. Who's really inspired me. So
yeah. I'm firmly, and I'll tell you why. So I'm firmly in Dave Smith for the presidential nomination, because I think that he's a great messenger, and ideologically he's aligned with where I'm at. But I'm pretty sure right now the Mises Caucus's position is that they want Dave Smith to run and Maj Touré to be his VP nominee. I think that Dave Smith's VP should be Justin Amash, given Justin's appeal and his experience in politics. And beyond that, if you look at the winning tickets in elections, Reagan, Bush, skip over Bush and Dan Quayle because they don't really count. They were just a continuation of Reagan. But Bill Clinton and Al Gore, George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, Obama and Biden, Trump and Mike Pence. And even you could lump in Gary Johnson and Bill Weld in this because they did get a lot of votes for a libertarian ticket. It's always a kind of personable, charismatic, maybe funny presidential candidate with a wonky, serious guy who looks good in a suit and tie vice presidential candidate who sort of lends that serious credibility to the ticket. so that's why I think that Dave and Justin are kind of the dream team. It's also why, Spike and Joe Jorgensen would have been a better ticket if they had flipped, because Spike is the charismatic, good on camera guy, and Joe is the more serious looking, like not gonna crack a joke or whatever type. And so to me, that's kind of the winning arrangement. They don't have to be necessarily ideologically aligned, but they do need to complement one another and fill in their gaps.
I have my doubts that Dave is going to bring in. Number one, I think Dave is doing very well doing what he's doing, and I don't want to mess with that. And if he runs for president, he's going to completely change his brand. I wouldn't be shocked if Rogan throws him under a bus if he runs for president either. I don't trust Rogan on that. There's a lot of sentiment. Well, Dave will get on Joe Rogan. Will he? Maybe he will. Maybe he won't.
But yeah, he'll get on Tim Pool for sure.
Yeah,
and not sure about Rogan.
We've gotten on Tim. Yeah, and Angela was on Tim Pool.
Yeah,
Tim's an Tim is somewhat sympathetic toward libertarians because he's also had Luke Rudkowski on there quite a few times.
Yeah.
One thing I know recently with Tim, Karlin Borisenko was not happy with Tim because Tim wasn't about the Bulldog incident in New Hampshire. Some libertarian went up to Don Bulldog, who was Bulldog, who was the guy who was running for Senate in New Hampshire for the Red Team, and they were all claiming that this libertarian activist assaulted him, and there are clear videos of it that have been circulated and Poole never caught on that, and a lot of people are wondering why he just let this narrative that Bulldog was attacked.
I don't think Tim Poole is under any obligation to cover tiny states Senate races.
It was a U.S. Senate race.
Yeah, I know, but nobody cares about New Hampshire other than New Hampshireites and libertarians.
No, actually, it was considered a possible battleground state, so it was somewhat in the news. I mean, it got, and so the right wing media is trumpeting these lies these lies, and apparently she tried to get to Tim Pool and said this is the truth, and Tim Pool didn't say a word about it. So I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like Karlin might have an outsized vision of her influence and New Hampshire's influence and what Tim Pool should be focusing on. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. That feels a little strange. Maybe Tim mentions the Mises Caucus kind of frequently. I'm not like a religious viewer of his show, but I hear him talk about it a lot. I figure Joe will have Dave on at least once. I mean, it would be weird if he didn't.
Yeah, I maybe will. And can Dave Smith run for president and then go back to being Dave Smith, the Dave Smith he used to be? Because I don't want Scott Horton to quit doing what he's doing. I don't want John Stossel to quit doing what he's doing. I mean, some of those people are doing what they're doing and they're doing it well, and I think we're best served by. So whether or not Dave and as far as anybody famous, you're not that far away. I really would love to see the LP try to recruit Aaron Rodgers.
Who's that? Oh yeah,
the quarterback for the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, the football player.
You live in Minnesota, so you hate the Packers. But anyway,
no, I don't hate the Packers, and I don't love the Vikings. I'm definitely a Dallas Cowboys fan.
That's true. Yeah, that's right.
I guess as a Dallas Cowboys fan, I'm supposed to hate the Packers. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so well, they hate, but that's somebody. I mean, because he was a speaker at the Bitcoin conference, so he's into Bitcoin.
Oh, really?
And he was very much resisting vaccine mandates. And I mean, here's somebody who's legitimately famous. I mean, who's really famous. Certainly, I'd say he's more famous than Dave. Dave Smith. Sure, and
that's really interesting. I didn't even think about him as potentially an ally. We've got Rob Schneider, the former Saturday Night Live star, and then a bunch of musicians. It would be nice to have and Drew Carey too. Although I think musicians are naturally libertarians, and of course, all of these people are also much more famous than Vermin Supreme. Vermin Supreme, boy, he's kind of gone full commie at this point. I
Yeah.
think.
But of course, if you talk to anybody who's a fan of Vermin Supreme, you'd think he was the most famous man in the world. But
Oh, of
anyway,
course, yeah. I mean, that's the same for people who are fans. Like my partner is constantly making fun of me for the people who I treat like celebrities who nobody's ever heard of, like Dave Smith and
yeah,
even Tim Pool.
Fans in general tend to overestimate the
Yeah.
popularity of the people they like.
I think if I mentioned Tim Pool to my parents or even my younger sister, who's in her mid-30s, I don't think they would have any idea who I was talking about. And Tim Pool is more famous than Dave Smith for sure.
Yeah, I think Tim's around here too, if my memory's right. He's somewhere in Austin, but I don't know.
He's in West Virginia. Everybody thinks he's in Austin. I always think he's in Austin.
Tim's in West Virginia, really?
Yeah,
Where?
or at least that's where he's building his compound. He's technically in Maryland, at least for now. That's where he reports.
Building a compound. What do you mean?
Yeah, he's building like an entire, like his entire staff lives together and stuff like that. It's crazy.
Is he going prepper or something like that? I mean,
yeah.
He's going to have 6 months of food and 6 months worth of gasoline and stuff like that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, he's even promoting the emergency rations, those big buckets of like freeze dried food you can buy.
Oh,
yeah. He even has those. It's a whole thing for him right now. He's got chickens but like it's also got a skate park and storage for all of the freeze dried food. I might have my facts not quite straight, but I do know that West Virginia is where he's building this thing, and Maryland is where he records from.
West Virginia is not a bad place to do that. I was born and raised in that wonderful state, which I of course love and hate at the same time. Sometimes,
yeah, I've always felt drawn to Appalachia. Like I could see myself settling in West Virginia or Kentucky or somewhere like that. Not now, but maybe retirement or something like that.
They're not that they're actually somewhat high tax because of their long tradition of being part of the old blue team of the FDR stripe and things like that. So you've been in, so I assume you were also pretty much behind Angela McArdle when she ran for chair of the LNC.
Yes. I didn't know Angela at all. Like we met in Orlando in 2020. And I had never heard of her. And it was, I think right after that, if not before that even, that's when it was announced that she was going to kind of be the Mises Caucus chair candidate. And, I liked her. Obviously I liked her better than Joe Bishop Henchman or any of the kind of old guard, but, I was on the floor team for the Mises Caucus. If you go rewatch the Libertarian National Convention videos from this year, you'll see me behind the mic a whole lot. And in those meetings, the leadership skills that she demonstrated was so impressive that I became completely sold on her. I don't regret my support for her at all. I think that she's going to be a tremendous chair. I really like that she's got the strategic planning mindset rather than just sort of doing everything ad hoc. I think that the party's going to be better for it after her term. Although, like everybody else, I'm a little bit impatient. I wish that we were seeing bigger and better results now. But there's a lot that goes with turning a ship around. Even a kind of smallish ship like the LP. So anyway, I'm confident in her. I'm confident in the LNC that we have installed. Although, I think that probably in the 2024 convention, we'll probably there will be another shakeup. There's some members of the LNC now that are not really pulling their weight. I'm not going to name any names, but I mean, the Mises Caucus takeover, I think all in all is a good thing. But whether it's in the state parties or the national party, there's going to be some messes to clean up. Here in Minnesota, for instance, we kind of swept our state convention last year, or I guess not quite last year yet, 2022. And what we had to show for it were 0 candidates on the ballot, statewide anyway. We had a few legislative candidates in a couple of school boards and stuff like that. And a party that's basically in disarray. Because we failed to nominate a gubernatorial candidate, even though there were 2 candidates running, that has a lot to do with our ranked choice voting system, and the candidate needing 2/3 of the vote to win. So we have to fix that in the bylaws. But we ended up with no governor candidate because like 12 people, myself included, voted for Noda, and that completely spoiled all of the other ballots. Noda didn't win, but nobody won, so it ended up being kind of a win for Noda. So the chair of our party resigned immediately at the convention. He got up behind the mic and announced his resignation, which kind of set everything in a tailspin. The vice chair, who was a Mises guy, became the chair. He had no experience as chairing a party. He was going to be kind of the understudy to the chair and the sort of heir apparent. And it caused a lot of turmoil among the party's kind of old guard, I guess. And I don't mean that pejoratively. The people who have all the experience of, collecting signatures to get people on the ballot and fundraising and, handling complaints from members and like just all the little stuff that comes along with running a third party that nobody on the current board knows how to do. The lack of experience from the Mises Caucus is definitely evident here in Minnesota. And I think a little bit, it's also evident in the National Party, although not quite as much because there are a lot of people on the current board who have experience from previous boards.
This is a question I've asked everybody who's involved with the LP on my show. And what do the haters of the Mises Caucus really want?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, most of the haters, this is such a stupid stereotype that we have as Mises Caucus people. Most haters of the Mises Caucus are not woke. They are almost as like disgusted or repulsed or just opposed to identity politics as we are. Maybe they're a little bit more sensitive to memes that have arguably offensive content, like there was a meme that just last week that presented Sam Bankman-Fried.
Yes, and Zelensky, and of course,
yeah,
Biden,
right. So the LP, the national account, put out this meme with Sam Bankman-Fried as sort of posed like the Jewish stereotypical cartoon Jewish guy. And nobody, like, I didn't notice it. Someone had to point it out to me, and we had retweeted it on the Minnesota Twitter page. I don't remember who did it, but that caused a stir. And obviously, now that we know that was there, it should be deleted, and we did delete it. But like, it's not a big deal that like people didn't see that. Like, I don't know. You have to be really, really sensitive to stuff like that in order to notice it.
Well, did you see how that meme was offensive to Texans?
No. What happened?
Well, Zelensky's doing the hook 'em horns.
Oh, is he? Jeez.
Yes.
Man, that's blasphemy.
Yeah. So it's a. I mean. Yeah.
So anyway,
there are people. I mean, when you have people who go around looking, it reminds me of, people who used to scan baseball cards looking for mistakes on the baseball cards.
Mm-hmm.
And they look around and say, "Oh, this guy's birthday is wrong on the baseball card," or something like that. I mean,
So to get back to your question, though, the haters aren't is they're not woke for the most part. They noticed the Jewish thing on the Zelensky meme, and great. I don't think that the outrage was necessarily warranted, but I'm glad that it was noticed. I'm glad that it was pointed out, and the situation can be rectified. But what they really want, and this is the 50-year-old conflict of the party. It's just been completely ongoing, and every so often the dominant side flips. There is a conflict of strategy. Nick Sarwark and his side, I guess, are dedicated to chasing votes. They want a presidential candidate who will get millions and millions of votes. If they can get 15% of the vote, great. So votes take the front seat, and messaging and getting the libertarian message out there takes the back seat. That's how you get that. That's why we have Bill Weld as a previous vice presidential candidate. Bill Weld is a terrible libertarian. He's not even a good Republican, and he's not good on almost anything. He's a progressive, and to me, progressivism is like the opposite of libertarianism. But that ticket got a ton of votes, and when vote chasing is your when you think that the purpose of the Libertarian Party is to get votes, then you will settle for a less than perfect libertarian candidate. The Mises Caucus is much more. So prior to now, obviously, it was the Radical Caucus that was sort of the, we need to get the radical message out there. The Mises Caucus isn't quite as, we're more pragmatic than the Radical Caucus. We don't necessarily believe in like no particular orderism and that kind of thing. But we do, I think for the most part, think that messaging is more important than vote getting. And that rings as it's like the opposite of what a political party should be doing. If we're going to be doing that, then we should become a PAC or a think tank and not a party. And, there's merit to that argument. I think that probably they need to rethink what the telos of a political party is. I tend to disagree with that. Like the purpose of a party is to get votes mentality. And it might even be that the purpose of a party is to get votes, but in order to get those votes, you first have to convince people that you're worth voting for. And you can't do that by running wishy-washy candidates who are, just a little bit different from the big parties.
I don't necessarily think those things have to be in conflict, though.
Yeah, totally.
And James, I don't know about you, but do you think that that the division has been exacerbated by the recent events, especially, what happened in March of 2020?
Yes.
I wholeheartedly do.
Yeah.
And
that's the, Dan Fishman and Nick Sarwark. Fishman was the executive director of the party, and Sarwark was the chair, obviously. They were completely bought in on the COVID narrative. And so when they were completely silent, and not just silent, but like prohibited the party from issuing any sort of statements that would run counter to the COVID narrative. That's why the Mises Caucus had such tremendous growth over the last few years. That said, we have a hater here in Minnesota who is very active in the National Party. I'm not gonna give away any sort of identifying information, but this person was even more fiery opposed to the COVID stuff than I was. This person, is a much better activist than me. They were like starting movements and attending meetings and going to rallies and organizing rallies and all that stuff. But, they would now fall on the side of the Sarwark and Fishman wing of the party because the Mises Caucus is seen as just having bungled everything. And, it's not true. Here, and I guess, part of it is sensitivity now in Minnesota that we didn't have any statewide candidates. And maybe that's another thing that is a kind of conflict between the Mises Caucus and our detractors, is that the Mises Caucus really only does want to focus on local races, most of which are nonpartisan, or many of which anyway. And those folks want to focus more on the high profile races that aren't winnable, but get us on the news. I don't know. I mean, like, is it worth the time, effort, and expense to run a gubernatorial candidate who's going to maybe get 2% of the vote?
Yes. Well, Well, one issue here, and it varies from state to state, obviously, but getting a certain percentage of votes in the gubernatorial election will get you ballot access.
Yeah.
That is what I mean. This is an old debate, and I definitely think running people locally is important, although it and certainly, although it doesn't quite attract the big donors of the big media the way that a bigger campaign will, but I don't think we're getting those anyway. But the ballot access issue is huge here, and I think that's one thing we definitely need to. I often do wonder.
It's huge here too.
We should just scrap. If we sometimes people say we should just scrap running for president altogether, which is certainly an interesting. But in a lot of cases, we'd also be making ballot access more difficult if we scrap that.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's a big deal here too. We need to get 5%. We never have. And so, and that to me is another strategic question. And it's why I mentioned earlier that I voted for NODA on our gubernatorial ballot at the convention. If I had known then what I know now, I would not have voted for NODA. I was very presumptuous that one of the gubernatorial candidates would be willing to accept a nomination for a lower office. I thought that it made much more sense for the LP to run a state auditor or secretary of state or something like that type candidate rather than the top of the ticket where they're not going to get as many votes as the high profile Republican and Democrat. They're not going to get as many votes against a high profile Republican or Democrat. We have a very unpopular attorney general here in Minnesota. It's Keith Ellison, who was my congressman prior to Ilhan Omar. He is all of the Democrats won re-election in Minnesota because we're basically a progressive monoculture at this point. But Keith Ellison came the closest to being defeated. That election specifically was very, very close. And a libertarian candidate possibly could have even spoiled it. Given our dedication to criminal justice reform. And I think that would have sent a great message as opposed to running a governor candidate against a very popular Republican who is, frankly, the most libertarian leaning Republican politician we have here in Minnesota, or at least one of them, who was a medical doctor, who was against the COVID lockdowns. And, he's not great on guns. He's not pure on taxes, but he's definitely a fiscal conservative, which is not what you can ask for with the Democrats. Anyway, and a pretty popular Democratic incumbent governor. I don't think that a libertarian would have done very well in that race. If they had run a libertarian attorney general or secretary of state type candidate, then we probably would have done better.
Yeah.
That said, I didn't ask the gubernatorial candidates, hey, would you be willing to accept the nomination for secretary of state or attorney general? I just presumed that they would because, they were, I didn't take into account their humanity. I took into account their utility as a candidate, which is kind of a shitty thing to do, but it's what I did. So anyway, I don't even remember what we were, what we were talking about. Yeah, statewide races. And ballot access and stuff. Yeah. So that is the argument here is, should we be running at the top of the ticket if there are lower offices that we could do better at? And, that's kind of my
but just, bringing up the whole ballot access thing. I mean, that's, if having that gubernatorial candidate makes it easier to run those other candidates.
Right.
That's a very old debate. I definitely think the Mises Caucus is at least asking a lot of questions that need to be asked. You're probably the first person who seemed to be motivated to get involved with libertarianism by the world's smallest political quiz. I mean, that seems to be a sacred cow among the LP. And it's like,
I know.
Why is this a sacred cow, mate? Is this really an effective recruiting tool? You should be asking this about everything, especially when when the Libertarian Party has basically been going sideways for 40 years.
I'm very interested in recruiting and what are good recruiting tools. I think that we need to be better at sales and, and less, I guess, philosophical. I don't know. Quizzes are cool because they're interactive and you can you know, put up a here, take our quiz poster at the state fair and stuff like that.
I think it makes people think like they're taking school or like they're being judged.
Yeah.
I don't see it as cool at all.
Yeah.
You know, I sometimes would call it, would you like to take our survey?
Survey is much better.
Because that seems
it's
like
not even a quiz. Like, it's not testing their knowledge of anything.
Yeah, but that's just one of those things that's just kind of accepted without even asking any questions as to whether or not it's effective or not. You know, it's interesting too. Because I definitely think the whole COVID thing exacerbated what happened with the divisions. Because I mean, we had an event here in Travis County, Texas, Austin, you know, and our chair and we'd made a decision. We're going to go to this event called the Constitutional Rights Summit. And then a bunch of volunteers show up and our county chair decides to back out because he sees a bunch of people who aren't wearing masks and didn't think it was good optics. And I'm like, oh gosh. Wow. I mean, this is exactly, I mean, I think one of the great, it's really a great tragedy to me that the anti-COVID hysteria movement was led by people like Alex Jones. I mean,
what do you think it is? This might be painting with too broad a brush, but what do you think it is about the fact that it seems like red states tend to have more blue-pilled libertarian parties, whereas blue states are pretty radical and red-pilled, for want of a better term?
I have no idea what to say about that. I'm not really because I don't this is the first time I've heard a theory like this. I've never considered this, and I don't know.
Yeah, like the Texas LP is super woke and super blue-pilled, and like you just mentioned, the mask thing, like,
yeah,
you know, y'all gave us Whitney Bilyeu, who's, you know, she's fine, but she's kind of milquetoast, and almost certainly corrupt like her predecessors.
I have no opinions on Whitney. I mean, it's I don't think it's really wise for somebody to try to be a state chair and a national chair, though. Holding both those jobs, just seems to me that's probably more work than you'd want to take on. But I don't know all the circumstances. I mean, and Whitney certainly seems like she's willing to work hard. I mean, she showed up and chaired National Sick for one day, and then just realized she couldn't do it. I mean, that's like Jack Youngblood playing the Super Bowl with a broken leg. I mean, she, you know, I'll certainly remember that. I mean, it's you know, there's that's one thing we all forget is a lot of these people, even if we disagree with them, they're putting in hours and hours and hours, you know, and for no pay. I mean, I think
absolutely.
Like, everybody has this really big emotional investment, you know, and
I think Angela McCardle and Karen Ann Harlow kind of have the right idea. They both have Patreons where you can support them.
Yeah. And I don't know what the rules are about that, you know, creating conflicts of interest and stuff like that. I mean, I think we have a lot of, and, you know, Karen's YouTube is monetized. And I mean, there's a lot of things there that can be issues. Angela is I'm amazed at all the stuff Angela gets done. And I mean, one of my favorite things about Angela too, though, is she just makes this occasional sardonic comment that just, you know, and you'll just start laughing, you know, like, what was that thing she says? I got James Ogle to leave a libertarian convention voluntarily. It's like, you know,
how did she do that? I didn't even know about that.
I guess she just got him annoyed some way and he walked out, you know, and, you know, it said, you know, like, well, you know, one thing I've said, you know, one of the greatest accomplishments for the Mises Caucus was getting James Weeks to quit. I mean, you know, oh, good, we don't have James Weeks anymore. Well, that's no great loss, you know, thank goodness. And I that's the amazing thing about the haters of the Mises Caucus is there seems to be very little self-awareness or very little reflection of just asking ourselves, have we thought about why we lost? You see a few people who, I mean, some of the haters of the Mises Caucus were the Mises Caucus's best recruiters, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, totally. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, and I wish these people would, and so few of them don't seem to want to sit down and just have a conversation.
Yeah. That said, though, like, I mean, do we ask ourselves why they won for 10 years, 15 years. However, since
Yeah.
The war on terror really did kind of ruin everything. We talked about this earlier, but it really, and then COVID did the exact same thing, where it really kind of shook out the people who really do think that the government is here to protect us, even in the LP.
Yeah. The war, the LP was growing in the 90s, and apparently that was the best. Really, the I don't know if the LP ever really recovered from the World Trade Center, because the LP lost a lot of memberships, I think, after the World Trade Center, largely because the war on terror also, led to the escalation of the war on immigrants.
Okay.
There were a lot of people, because the LP has always had, the LP doesn't think we should have a war on immigrants. And there's, a growing faction of people in America who just hate immigrants and don't want them to come here, and, and just scream and shout about them all the time. And
I think, given that you're from a border state, and maybe that's the answer to my question. Maybe it's not necessarily the red states and the blue states, but maybe it's the border states. The immigration debate is so, I don't know. I never think about immigration. I just don't. It's not an issue that I am passionate about one way or the other. I totally get the sort of Dave Smith / Hoppe argument that you can't have open borders if you have a welfare state. And you can't have open borders if your culture is sick. And you can't have open borders if your central government runs everything. All of those things make sense to me. But it's not something I'm passionate about. Whereas if you go on Twitter and you look at a lot of our haters, that is the key issue. That is why they hate Dave Smith and why they hate the Mises Caucus, because we're open to the idea that open borders is a late stage libertarian thing and not an immediate libertarian thing.
Well, if I go into, if I'm made president tomorrow, I'm certainly going to have my priorities of things I'm going to fix. And, and the main issue is too, and this observation was made to me by somebody I really don't like that well, but he often says, I think the reason conservatives don't do anything to get rid of the welfare state because it creates all these excuses for other things that they want. And I think that's one reason. And I think they don't get rid of the welfare state because they can use that as a way to hit immigrants over the head. They hate immigrants, and the welfare, and keeping the welfare state is their excuse for hating immigrants. So because they don't do anything to get rid of the welfare state.
So they get rid of the immigrants instead, or at least that's the thing that
they want to have a welfare state, and they want to have a border wall. They do not want to have open borders and no welfare and laissez-faire capitalism. They don't want that. They want to have the welfare state so they can justify the border wall. That's my point.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I guess it's because it's been gone for over 30 years now. But that wall in Berlin wasn't built to keep West Berliners out of East Berlin.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you think is going to happen when a wall's built?
Yeah, I don't know of any libertarians who are in favor of the border wall, but border controls, there certainly are some, or maybe even most. I don't know where the party stands on that. Another one.
Yeah, this is one thing. There's certainly different levels of border controls. I mean, that's one thing. Yeah.
The other really contentious issue is obviously abortion. And I guess both of those things, it kind of boils down to how you interpret the non-aggression principle. And maybe that's why it's so controversial. I would say that it's not a violation of the NAP to restrict entry into a geographical territory any more than it's a violation of the NAP to restrict entry into my backyard. If in the current state of things, the borders are collectively owned, which obviously that's a contradiction in terms, but like that's kind of how it operates, then the owners of that territory get to say who comes and goes, or especially who comes. And then abortion, is it a non-aggression principle violation for a fetus to occupy the womb of a woman, or is it a violation of the NAP for that woman to decide that entity inside of her can't live because it's inconvenient for her or emotionally scarring or whatever? It's a very hard question to answer. Like if I own a plane and I'm up in the air and I find out that there's a stowaway on board, yes, technically he's violating my property rights, but am I justified in forcing him out of the airplane with no parachute? Well, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
Even, unless he presents some kind of actual threat to my person, that sort of consequence for occupying my property is so far out of proportion as to be absurd. And I would argue a violation of that person's
and sometimes I jokingly wonder, because for the pro-abortion crowd, pregnancy is something that just kind of happens. Do they know how that happens or not? You sometimes wonder if they do know how it happens.
Yeah, with the obvious exceptions of rape and incest, and or maybe not. But even incest, like if you voluntarily have sex with your brother, then it's gross, but it also is on you. That's your decision.
And unfortunately, there's also the other more practical argument is, why would you want to stop Gretchen Whitmer from having an abortion? Why would you want to stop Jacinda Ardern from having an abortion? Why would you want to stop Greta Thunberg from having an abortion?
Yeah,
why would you want to stop them from having? You want them to have kids?
No, and that's why I support forced sterilization.
If they're going to take themselves out of the gene pool.
That was a joke, by the way. I don't actually support
forced sterilization. What was your joke there? I missed that. Sorry.
I said, yeah, that's why I support forced sterilization.
Yeah, it's you might get taken out of context. I don't support.
Yeah, I know. That's why I walked it back in my next line.
It's I don't know.
And
I just wish that, the hard thing, it's so hard to have conversations with the people who hate the Mises Caucus. They just don't seem to want to have. They don't seem to want to have dialogues. And I was at an event, and I was at an event in August where I then later found out, and I said, and I tried to listen to her, and I said, what do you really want? What's important to you? And they don't want to talk about it. They just want to, they just seem to want to sulk and pout. And then they wonder, and I said, do you realize you're not really very appealing to anybody when you're like that? It's, but COVID was huge for me because I didn't see that many people leave after 9/11, but in March of 2020, I'm just like, what on earth happened here? I thought these people were solid, and now they're and it's like, and sometimes I've just brought up the issue. It's like, why are you here if you think this is okay?
There's a few other things that are kind of contentious, I think, probably. I think the Mises Caucus types have become a little bit, I don't know. So I don't think that corporations as constituted now are rightly considered private entities.
Yeah.
Because at any time, given their relationship with the state as corporations, they could be just taken over. And that happens with private. It could also happen with private, sole proprietorships and things like that. But corporations actually are like government entities, or at least sort of a fascistic, weird partnership or whatever with the government. And we've seen that shake out. I think we all suspected that, Twitter and the other social networks were being pressured by the government to censor things. But now that we know that it actually happened, like, yeah, we were right. These people are in bed with the state. And so many libertarians, and especially in the not old, but the LP of pre-2020, and also the, Reason and Cato and those other organizations that are sort of the mainstream Beltway libertarians, they still think that Twitter is a private entity. They still think that Mark Zuckerberg is just, a CEO who's doing what he thinks is best for his company. And that to me is so dumb. Like, I can't even think of a different word. Like, it's just stupid to still think that.
It's kind of like how, you contract out to Halliburton and Blackwater to do this war stuff. There's definitely something going on there. I don't know how you solve this problem. What some people on the right want to do is definitely an issue. When Blake Masters said he was wanting to, tamper with Section 230, I'm just thinking like, oh my gosh. And I was
we need is more
not,
central planning.
Yeah. You just need more competition, and you need to allow the competition to happen, and that will naturally take place. But there's definitely a desire to hit these people, and that really bothers me. It's I definitely think, but yeah, where they completely. I mean, I'm trying to figure out why some of these people that's definitely something that you can sit down and debate. How do you? And I think the best thing is to just let it happen, that you somehow encourage competition. But
right. And the obvious answer is get Congress out of the boardroom. But that's the libertarian 1990s. We just need to focus on private charities. That kind of thing. Like that doesn't convince anybody. It's not going to happen. So what's the real solution?
The curious thing I've noticed though about like Cato and Reason and those other organizations also is, and also among unfortunately among the objectivist movement too, is there's very little interest in cryptocurrency there.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't seem to care about it, and I find that. And I really think this is one of the bigger, possibly one of the biggest libertarian innovations.
Yeah, that's a really good point. When Catherine Mangu Ward took over as the editor-in-chief of Reason after Nick Gillespie, he was editor for a number of years, but
yeah,
she said, under my tenure, we're gonna make Reason less about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, sort of the countercultural stuff that's why Kennedy and Kurt Loder and all these MTV people were affiliated with Reason.
Yes.
Because Nick Gillespie had this huge, kind of countercultural, he's got a PhD in English literature. Like he understands art and loves art. Catherine Mangu Ward, she said, I'm going to take it from sex, drugs, and rock and roll to sex, drugs, and robots. And to me, like, okay, we're not talking so much about robots, but we're talking a lot about these new emerging technologies, and crypto is certainly one of the big ones. So yeah, I am a little bit surprised that they're not focusing more on it, especially given her areas of focus when she took over.
There's certainly more of that from the Mises Institute, and there's a whole lot more, of interest in that, and say with kind of like the Agorists, the anarcho-pulco crowd.
Oh yeah,
and people like that, and people who really don't even get involved in libertarian politics at all. There's a whole lot there, and I won't say that. I don't know if Bitcoin is the solution, but I think it's the greatest possibility right now because because I've largely come to the conclusion that you can't have democracy and have capitalism, and you can't have a gold standard and have democracy either.
Yeah. At least at the large scale. I mean, if we're talking about a city state or something very small like that, then sure. I mean, almost any form of government can work well at a small enough scale. But the bigger it gets, the more either tyrannical or laissez-faire it needs to be in order to function right. And obviously, I think I and you and most people would agree that laissez-faire is preferable to tyranny.
Yeah,
Hopefully most people would think that. I mean, after COVID, who knows?
it's really COVID, really, and I think it's also unfortunate too that COVID gave rise, at least partially, to what I'd call what this new movement called post-libertarianism, and I think they're just angry because a lot of people, COVID made a lot of people angry.
Yeah, I'm friends and friendly with a lot of the post-libertarians. And certainly COVID had a big part of it. A lot of it. So I'm sure you noticed that COVID, the mass hysteria that we experienced was very, very similar to a religious awakening, like a revival of some sort. People were very superstitious and, thought that by reciting the right incantations, wear the mask, follow the rules, trust the science, that kind of thing. And by wearing the right religious garb, like the mask and the, some people even the hazmat suits and the ridiculous, like 6 foot long pool noodles hanging off their heads and stuff like that. There's all that stuff that made it such a weird time, brought a lot of people to more traditional religions. It's why there's been just exponential growth in Christian Orthodoxy, especially Eastern Orthodox churches are overflowing.
I find that that's very curious.
Yeah. Well, and it's because Eastern Orthodoxy is new and novel and very traditional, and the Catholic Church laid down on the job when it came to COVID, and the Orthodoxy for the most part was pretty.
How would the history of 2020 have been different if, say, the Pope would say no, you keep going to church?
Yeah. I can't think of a single Pope. I don't think even Benedict would have taken that tack, because
there were certainly priests and clergymen at the local level who said, no, I'm not closing my church.
Yeah.
But and certainly the Amish and some of the non-technical people, and as I was talking to a lady a few days ago, she said, I don't really have a good internet connection. She says I have to go into the office to do this database work because she doesn't really have that much. There's a lot of things there that didn't get considered. I mean, but I think if the churches had stood up and presented some kind of unified front, I don't think this ever could have been done at all. Yeah. I think it would have fallen apart. And it's like, where were the churches? And I've asked a lot of my religious friends. It's like, you guys failed this completely.
They really did. Monica Perez, actually, she's a podcaster, but she's also a pretty devout Catholic. She's funny. She describes herself as religious but not spiritual, which I love. I think that's hilarious. But yeah, she thinks that the fact that the church was preventing people from, and specifically the Catholic Church, was preventing people from receiving the sacraments, imperiled their souls. Like, she really thinks that people are going to go to hell, whether it's clergy or faithful, no telling. But she thinks that was a big reckoning for Christianity in general and Catholicism in particular.
And I've known people who were they'd be in the hospital, there'd be these volunteers who would go and give them communion on Sunday. That was a fairly a big part of that, and not to mention the shutting down meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous and stuff like that. I mean, that was just how you could not see that as anybody who knows anything would have seen that as a complete disaster.
And the liquor stores being essential.
Yeah.
Which, granted, I spent a lot of money on liquor in 2020, so I'm glad the liquor stores were open. but it does kind of give you a picture of where the values are. Yeah. I think that I keep dropping names. There's this Substack writer and podcaster named Tessa Lena. She grew up in the USSR and moved over here shortly before the collapse of the Soviet system. She wrote this piece about the decline of Eastern European civilization as just being really weird. She tells an anecdote about she was sitting in a restaurant, and the staff came out of the kitchen. It was like 3 dudes, and they just came out of the kitchen and they sawed a table in half and then went back to work. Like they just, for whatever reason, that moment they needed to saw a table in half. And it's just so weird. Like it's just silly little things like that. People taking dumps on the sidewalk now. And I don't know. Like I go to the gym. I go to, just an LA Fitness. It's like a chain gym. You pay the $30 a month, you get to go and you can swim in the pool and stuff like that. And there was a guy there that was just like, he just was swimming in his underwear. Like he didn't bring a swimsuit. So he just strips down to his drawers and swims like that. Like, it's just little weird things like that. The other day, this past week, Grindr, the gay hookup app, went public on the New York Stock Exchange, which, like, I'm not opposed to Grindr. Like I love that there's an app where gay people can meet each other, but that should be countercultural. That should not be like part, in my opinion, part of the, like, cronyist banking system that we have. It's just, it's just a little weird to me. Like,
that reminds me of something. When I read Hans Hermann Hoppe's book, Democracy, the God That Failed,
mm-hmm.
I emailed him about it, and I realized what he's saying here applies to businesses and corporations just as much.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
If you've got, let's say you've got, you were talking about Grindr. Let's say you've got a private company that's owned by a sole proprietor. He wants his company to be profitable. He wants to make money, but he also knows that he's eventually going to die, and his kids are going to take over. His grandchildren are going to his grandchild is going to take over. So he wants them to have a profitable company as well.
Mm-hmm.
But once the company goes publicly traded, that low time preference goes out the door.
Oh, that's a really good point.
I mean, the publicly traded corporation cares about maybe the upcoming annual report and maybe a few more annual reports, and that's it. They have no long-term vision, and therefore, and that's also why they end up becoming just lobbyists who own a lot of stock.
It's true. Yeah.
And
I haven't even really thought about that. I'm always
sad to hear when somebody goes public. I really am. And I know, and they go public largely because the owner may want to retire and he wants to get a windfall. So he gets a windfall by going public. But, you could sell the company just as easily. But that's the beginning of the end. It's kind of sad, really. I forgot to ask you too. You've been in Minnesota since when?
2010, February of 2010. So almost 13 years.
You didn't know any of those people that were involved with that RNC8 group, did you?
No. What's the RNC8?
That was a group of more lefty activists who were they were arrested under this conspiracy to riot. It was a bunch of horsemen, and there were definitely some moles in there. But really, they were just going to have a demonstration outside the convention. I just wondered if you were, because that happened in Minnesota. It was in Hennepin County, I think it is, or
that's Minneapolis. That's where I live.
Yeah. It was some.
Okay. This looks like it was in 2009. So right before I moved here.
Yeah, they were more lefties, but one thing I remember is libertarians hardly talked about that at all. It was some kind of weird.
Yeah.
Naomi Wolf certainly talked about it, but I don't know how much I would have considered her a libertarian. But it's always been interesting to see what libertarians pay attention to, don't pay attention to. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens with the.
Oh, right. I forgot. So the RNC was here in 2008. That's when Ron Paul also had that parallel rally for the Republic. I wasn't here yet.
Yeah.
But I was cognizant of the rally for the Republic. I remember watching it.
Yeah.
Streaming.
Yeah. One of the women's name was named Monica Bicking. That was one name I remember, but that didn't get as much attention as I thought it would, at least not from libertarians. The Ron Paul movement's always been kind of funny. So you don't seem that upset about Dave endorsing this Blake Masters guy, I guess.
No, I I'm not real partisan. Like, I care more
Yeah.
about liberty than the Libertarian Party, and Blake Masters. I mean, listen to Dave's show. I agree with what he said. But
I don't know. I just saw a lot of red flags with Blake Masters. I
yeah,
mean, really the alliance, the comments about Israel were the huge thing that stood out for me too. I mean, you can't be anti-war and favor being Israel's bitch. So
I think you worded that well. Like, it's not
yeah,
Israel. It's not the Israeli people. It's certainly not the Jews.
yeah,
But yeah, it's the fact that so many American politicians, enough to have a stranglehold on Congress, are, like you said, Israel's bitch, like the Israeli government. Which feels strange. Like, it feels like it should be that Israel is our bitch, but it's really not the case.
it's rather interesting too because it worries me sometimes that something Americans have almost gotten used to that they don't even question anymore. And certainly. So what? Were you involved in any of the Floyd protests and those were happening in Minnesota, or what'd you think about all that?
I actually happened to be in Texas at the time. I was visiting my family.
Yeah.
It was Memorial Day weekend in 2020, and by the time we got home, it had all died down. And the lockdown had been lifted. Our governor, in his infinite wisdom, realized, I kind of created a pressure cooker here, didn't I? And he lifted the lockdowns. He would say prematurely, probably. Certainly, a lot of Minnesotans said prematurely, but right after the riots. What do I think about it? At the time, I was really gung ho. I loved seeing the police station infiltrated. I thought it was cool. Finally, we were getting a reckoning. I've tempered my, and I drew a very bright line between burning down private businesses and vandalizing cop shops and things like that.
Yeah.
At this point, I don't know. I still would consider myself pretty anti-police, but I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not in the defund the police camp.
I just remember there's one guy in Minnesota I kind of liked because he was coming against a lot of the COVID nonsense. Paul Utke, is that his name?
Boy, I don't know that name.
He was, I think he's a senator or a representative, but he's in Minnesota's house up there. Oh. He was really coming out against the COVID stuff.
Cool. I don't know him or of him. Scott Jensen was the GOP nominee for governor this year. Yeah. He is a medical doctor who was very against the COVID protocols and mandates and things like that. And so he's kind of the one who I hitched my wagon to. I actually endorsed him and voted for him for governor this year. So I guess it would be hypocritical of me also to criticize Dave too much for.
Well, if the LP didn't have anybody,
huh?
The LP didn't have anybody, or
yeah, no. We actually that was the race I was telling you about that we failed to nominate somebody for. Yeah. It was coincidental that we didn't know who the GOP's nominee was going to be at our convention. Yeah. It just so happened that the Republicans nominated somebody half decent. But like I said earlier,
how do you end up with that? Yeah. Did you meet some decent Republicans when you were involved with the Ron Paul Republicans or not? I've met some decent ones in Texas.
Yeah.
I don't know if there were any good ones when I lived in Ohio, but that wasn't when Ron Paul was running. So
yeah, the bulk of them were pretty big time libertarians. I mean, the highest profile Ron Paul people, at least here in Minneapolis, they're agorists. Like they're too libertarian for the LP. They just happen to really like Ron Paul back then. So yeah, they're great. So the biggest name, I guess, right now in the Libertarian Party of Minnesota is a guy named Nate Atkins, who ran for mayor of Minneapolis.
Yeah,
and just everybody just kind of loves him. He's a Mises Caucus guy, but he bridges the gap really well.
Well, also, of course, one Minnesota libertarian got famous, at the convention because of Shouldergate.
What? Who was that?
What? Shouldergate? Wasn't Nick Flatley from Minnesota?
No. Was that? Are you talking about when Nick Sarwark accused the dude of assault?
Yeah.
No, I thought that guy was from Texas.
He's definitely not from Texas.
Oh, weird. Wisconsin, maybe.
Maybe I'm confused. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Were you in Reno? Were you there?
Yes, I was in Reno. Yeah.
Was Wisconsin over by? Because that's where it happened. Was over on your side.
Maybe
we were on the opposite side of
Wisconsin. He definitely was not from Texas.
Cool.
Maybe I'm sorry if I get Minnesota and Wisconsin confused. I'm probably not the only one who does that, but
everybody does. It's fine.
Well, there's similarities in a lot of character. Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I've always found interesting about Minnesota is it always seems like there's a lot of studio wrestlers from Minnesota too, but
studio wrestlers like Jesse Ventura.
Yeah. Jesse Ventura, Vern Gagne.
Yeah. Those indoor sports are big up here.
or even not necessarily real sports, but yeah. So but Minnesota certainly has an interesting sports history because I think they produce a lot of the American hockey players.
Totally. And Dallas, of course, is no slouch in the professional wrestling industry either. I mean, I remember going to the Sportatorium when I was a little kid and getting high fives from, either old washed up WWF stars or like future WWF stars who hadn't quite made it big yet. I know it's WWE now, but
wouldn't that have been the Von Erichs?
Yeah. So Fritz Von Erich, the dad, was before my time, and Kerry Von Erich, the son who made it real big in the WWF. I never saw at the Sportatorium, so I never got to see any of the Von Erichs. But apparently, my grandfather back in the 50s or 60s or whatever, he and his friends all went to the Sportatorium, and apparently one of his buddies started just knocking the snot out of Fritz Von Erich. He was drunk, and Fritz Von Erich maybe got thrown out of the ring, or I don't know, but bumped into him somehow.
Oh wow, yeah.
And he started really punching him, which I just thought it was the funniest story. It might have been a complete fabrication. I don't know. My grandpa told a lot of big fish stories, but
oh well, that's good. Yeah, it's we should get with Jack Hunter and talk with him about because he's a big guy into wrestling. He's always he goes by the Southern Avenger sometimes. He's a big Ric Flair fan, but wrestling used to be very regional, and you had these promotions, and of course they'd all combine, of course being regional because I think a lot of their money was made, with house shows, and then when cable TV took over is kind of when it went national.
Yeah,
because there wasn't really any place for them to go national until then, but.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, I think we've probably any other topics you want to hit right now, or I think we've probably had a good talk right now. So I
think I'm good. I appreciate the time. Ever since I've quote unquote retired from podcasting, I'm always eager to have these conversations because, I definitely don't miss the work of putting together a podcast, but I love chatting.
What other podcasts do you like besides, hopefully you like this one. You listen to Liberty Lockdown, you said, and you listen to some other ones.
Yeah. I think so the shows that I kind of just never miss that are at the top of my queue. So there's Dave Matthews, Dave Matthews. What the hell? Jesus. As far as I know, Dave Matthews doesn't have a podcast, but so Dave Smith and Tom Woods and Michael Malice, kind of the obvious ones. The Propaganda Report is real good if you want a good kind of headline. An analysis of the headlines from a very, very red-pilled position, almost to the point where they're kind of conspiracy kooky a little bit.
Yeah.
So there's a guy named Henry Bingaman. He's from Pennsylvania. He's a very successful copywriter, and he hosts a podcast that kind of merges entrepreneurship and self-sufficiency with politics. It used to be called Getting Out of the Machine, and now it's called Practical Liberty. I do recommend that. And then not libertarian, but definitely a good listen is Matt Taibbi's America This Week. You might have to subscribe to his Substack to get that, but
I like him. He's one of those old, he used to be involved with Rolling Stone. He's one of those old Rolling Stone types. There aren't very many of them left, but I hope that it'll be interesting to see what happens. It makes me wonder. I mean, I don't consider her a libertarian, but do you think we could educate Tulsi?
I think she'll probably come around, but I feel like she'll probably just land in the GOP. I don't think she's
Possibly,
gonna.
yeah. Who I think, who I think might turn to. She's not. I think she's already maybe showing doubts, but she's shown signs. I wouldn't be surprised if in 10 years AOC goes the other way.
Really?
I think there's definitely, or maybe she'll just get out of it altogether.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm curious to know what you think about where you think Ilhan Omar will go too. Yeah, we should ask you about that. Yeah.
Oh God. Yeah. Ilhan. I don't know. So she's real good. She's real good on the war on terror.
Yeah.
Given that she's a refugee from Somalia, like it makes sense.
Yeah, and you said
she would be good on that.
too.
But that doesn't translate. So like she's pretty bad on Ukraine, for instance.
Yeah.
Which I mean, the propaganda surrounding Ukraine is pretty much identical to the propaganda that was surrounding Iraq at the time, in 2002 or whatever. We were talking before we started recording, I think we kind of landed on the agreement that there's a pretty clear aggressor and a pretty clear victim of aggression in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. It's just American involvement in it that's controversial. And
I'm not going to pretend, that I think Russia has any. I don't think Russia's ever going to become some libertarian paradise. And it seems like to me, especially after the fall of the Berlin Wall and stuff, is that all the good Russians leave. And now they're just left with these people who carry pictures of Stalin in public. And I said, those people aren't going to, I consider those people irredeemable. I don't think you're ever going to educate them if they're out there carrying some picture of Stalin in public. I mean, I don't know. That's one question we never asked ourselves. Who makes the, there was that old saying, where they said, communists actually make the best Nazis. Who out there would make the best libertarians? And I don't really know. It's, but maybe it's, but it is something interesting to look into and see where we can go. I think one thing, it's always important, no matter how bad somebody is, it's important to acknowledge when they are and fighting one of the good fights. Because that's the only way you're going to, I mean, how else can you get them to fight more of the good fights?
Yeah, that's a good point.
And 9 out of 10 fights that Ilhan Omar fights are going to be the bad ones. But if she fights one of the, maybe we can, get her from one good fight out of 10 to 2 good fights out of 10.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's really interesting, but yeah. Well, it's been good talking to you, and I'm really enjoying this. I like your background and.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that's my.
I hope everything works out for Minnesota, and maybe speaking of Minnesota, maybe get Fran. He's old to get Fran Tarkenton into politics too. I don't know if any.
Was he a football player?
Yeah, he was the Vikings. Yeah. Oh, you really don't know sports. Yeah.
What position did he play?
He was a quarterback for the Vikings. He's largely considered one of the best quarterbacks of all time. But yeah.
All right. I know the name. I'm trying to think when I played. So I played football, but I don't follow football.
Yeah.
My dad would used to.
Yeah.
Compare me to somebody, and it couldn't have been him. I was a lineman. I don't know.
Dude, where'd you play football?
Well, I played from 4th grade through my junior year in high school.
Where was that?
Huh?
Was that a pretty good school or?
Yeah, I went to a Jesuit high school in Dallas and public schools before that.
Okay. Yeah. That some of the the private schools don't do like they do up in other states where they really kick butt, but yeah. But anyway, yeah. So
so my high school now is competing against the public schools. It was big enough to enter the UIL in Texas, but we weren't UIL back then.
If you don't mind me asking, were you out in high school?
No, I came out right after I graduated, though.
It probably wasn't safe to come out in high school back then, was it?
No, it wasn't.
I was a teenager in the 80s. It definitely was not safe then. We were absolutely horrible, James. I look at my generation. I look at my generation and I kind of look at myself, I'm kind of proud of the fact, because I remember going to my 30-year reunion and here are these people who are gay and they're openly gay and they never would have been gay. They never would have come out as gay back in high school.
Yeah. Well,
And,
I remember having the conversation
you
with
know,
my best friend, a guy named Matt. We're not in touch anymore, but in high school we were really close. We were sitting at the lunch table and we were talking about how one of our classmates was pretty effeminate and probably gay. He is gay.
yeah,
Like we know now that he was.
there were
Um,
people that definitely the people that ended up being gay. It's like, yeah, this didn't really surprise me.
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
I know.
a lot of some one of there were kind of the more athletic girls, it seemed, and some of the boys who just didn't seem to care all that much. It's getting harder to tell, though. I think.
Yeah, well, when now we've kind of inserted transgender and
Yeah,
non-binary into the mix, which adds more things for more identities to contend
yeah.
with. So
Well,
it can get a little bit confusing and things like
well,
that.
for example, rock and roll has never had the level of testosterone than it had with bands like Motley Crue in the 1980s.
Mhm. Yeah,
It's gotten soft since then.
the guys who are
Yeah,
like conspicuously wearing makeup and cross-dressing and long hair
sort
and
of. But then all these girls go backstage and want to,
yeah, totally,
and all these girls are throwing their bras and panties at them. It's like,
totally.
yeah,
Homoeroticism was
yeah,
so like, well, that's the thing. I don't want to drag on
yeah.
this conversation for too long, but the thing is, like, when you normalize the counterculture, then you don't have a counterculture anymore. Like
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
it's
What does it mean to be alternative? Yes.
yeah. So that's why, and that is why a
Yeah.
big part of why traditionalist religions and
Yeah.
right wingism are now the new counterculture.
Well,
And
what's so funny too is if back like in the 80s, I mean, Motley Crue singing a song like "Shout at the Devil." I mean, they were about as anti-Reagan as you can be.
uh,
And now all these people that I remember that were, big fans of Motley Crue, they're all right wing now.
yeah,
I'm just like,
totally.
what? I've said to one guy, he's become real Christian. I said to him, I know you've sinned. He used to wear a shirt that said "kicking ass on the wild side" in high school.
Yeah.
I said, look, it's like, you can't preach at me because I know your
Yeah.
history. It's like, that's funny. These people have become Christians. If they knew you in high school and you knew how wild they were, it's like, you can't preach at me because I know, it's like
that reminds me
yeah.
of another podcast I love
Yeah.
is Counterflow with Buck Johnson, who
Oh yeah, Buck's got Buck's does a good job. Yeah, I like
he's
Buck.
an old punk rocker, and now he's like a becoming an Orthodox Christian. And he'll have other Orthodox Christians who were big in the punk scene in the 80s, and they just kind of reminisce. Yeah. It's
I never thought I should ask you, what do you think about Yarvin?
I am a big fan of his writing. I think he's just as pie in the sky, utopian as your most pie in the sky utopian libertarian. And I still am more of a Hoppian than a Yarvinian, but I think that Yarvin has good things to say. I think he's got things that are worth reading. Another one who's kind of similar to Yarvin is oh geez, hang on, I've got his tab.
Curtis Yarvin. Yes,
he runs a site called something House.
Yeah,
Charles Haywood is his name.
Oh yeah, I've heard it. Yeah, he's been on Buck
the Worthy.
Yeah,
the Worthy House. Charles Haywood. He writes a little bit like Yarvin. He's just again like just as unrealistic. He's a little bit more black-pilled too.
I think we're all kind of unrealistic because we have a destination, we just don't have a. But I think you've got to start with a destination before you can get out the map and figure out how to get there. It's a.
I had the opportunity to spend about an hour and a half in a car with Yarvin a few weeks ago. And
oh wow, yeah.
It was.
I kind of wish I'd went to that event, but I didn't go for whatever reason.
Yeah, well, I got to pick him up from the airport, which is kind of nice. It was cool.
Oh yeah.
They say don't meet your heroes. He wasn't as impressive in person. Like, he's funny and engaging, and I was able to ask him a bunch of questions, which was nice because he blew me off when I invited him to be on the podcast. But I don't know. Like, he's a normal guy. Like, that's the thing. Like, he's. You can tell that he's probably grasping at straws just as much as everybody else.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, I like him. I read him. I donate. Yeah. I subscribe, financially to his Substack. So obviously, I think that there's something there.
It's going to be interesting. I think we've got to certainly figure out the whole problem of governance and something like that. It's, Jefferson has said history only shows us what bad government is, and that's still a lot of truth to that, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, I'm going to go. I'm Chris Baker. You can find me at chrisbaker.net and my novel Escape from the Village. And where can we find you, James?
Great. Find me on Twitter at JamesLJ. And I'm going to be probably promoting my freelance copywriting. So if you've got a business that needs ads written,
freelance copywriting. Yeah.
Yeah. If you got a business that needs ads written, or if you are a content creator who might want help with content creation, drop me a line. My DMs are open on Twitter. That's that.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Bye-bye, James. Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Chris. Talk to you later.
Yes. Bye-bye.